Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens and this is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. So I am returning for another bonus video, a follow-up of the video I actually filmed a couple weeks ago when I began reading The Anatomy of Genres, How Story Forms Explain the Way the World Works by John Truby. So again, I have not quite finished the whole thing, but I've gotten substantially further into the book. If you haven't seen that previous video, I explained the basic premise that John Truby is going to go through all of these different genres in a variety of ways, analyzing them, looking at the story forms, how to improve them, examples of how it has been done well, and how we can learn from those things, not only about how to write stories ourselves, but how to learn how to live through these different lenses. Like it says, the story forms explain the way the world works. So horror, for example, confronts the idea of death, and one of its major concerns is religion, or this way to sort of transcend death through different means. So anyway, I talked about that in my previous video, but with a lot of skepticism towards some of the premises that he lays out in his early chapters, his sort of prologue, establishing chapter, and then the first genre or so. Now, I still have not gotten over the fact that he mentions that the golden idol in Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark is under a glass cloche. That is incorrect. I even went back to see if there was some sort of Mandela effect preventing me from remembering my beloved Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was no glass case. So I continued onward feeling very mixed emotions about the mistakes like that. There were a couple early on that really undermined the credibility. Just if you're writing a nonfiction book, you want to, of course, come across with very strong credibility, building that ethos, right? And so I was kind of fighting against these strong claims that he was making, and yet the mistakes that he was also making. I also had some issues with just the way that he set up his premises. Anyway, you can watch that video if you want my full thoughts on the beginning. Now, as I have continued to read this book, my thoughts and opinions toward it have changed somewhat. So I'm going to explain more about what I'm appreciating about this book and why I will keep it as a resource. And then some of the things that I wish had been explained or organized better. So something that became clearer and clearer the further I read into this book is something that I started to suspect partway through actually editing the previous video, which is the way that he creates a hierarchy of genres. So that very concept of a hierarchy of genres goes against my multi-genre writing heart. I write everything from horror to literary to spicy romantasy to cozy fantasy that's good for all ages, including children. So the idea that there is this sort of fundamental hierarchy felt elitist to me, but what I've realized is that what he was trying to do is organize his information in a logical, stair-steppy way that corresponded with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So what is the primary concern of horror? It is coming face to face with death. It is the most primal of the needs that need to survive. And then as you continue on up through, in his words, through these levels, if you will, you reach a level of happiness and self-actualization in the love genre, which again, I have slight issues with putting love all in one, but I can see more now why he organizes his genres in that way, and I have a lot more respect for the way that he connects these fundamental human needs and pairs those up with its corresponding genre that's going to tackle that issue, that concern, that human need head on in a way that's going to personalize it through the lens of story. So I started to really get on board with that by the time I was partway through Action. action doesn't seem like a genre that you would have a whole lot to say about. I mean, what is there to say about action? You want some good fights, you want some good explosions, you want, if I'm going to go see an action movie, I'm happy if it's not the best cinematic experience necessarily. I'm going for the action. Obviously there's a scale of better and worse, but what John Truby has done is he, for all of these genres, takes these story beats. He calls it steps of the story code. That's one of the things I don't enjoy about this book necessarily, is some of the tags, the names he has for elements of storytelling. I feel like he could have been slightly simpler with it, a little bit more obvious. And anyway, I'll get into organization here shortly, but the 7 major steps of the story code, which is buried in the horror chapter rather than in the beginning where I think it belonged, to establish what the book's organization was going to be. But for each of these genres, he establishes what is the weakness or need of the main character, typically for that genre to be that genre and to work. So what kinds of flaws, what kinds of needs do they have? The desire, opponent, plan, battle, self-revelation, and then new equilibrium. I like that he doesn't go really simple like the hero's journey. He addresses these different really famous conceptions of plot and character, but he takes a more nuanced look than most people do at these concepts. So he's going to look at the weakness or need of characters in horror stories, in action stories, in myths. What is it? In myth, you're going to have discovering the self as the need of the character, and you get that through those episodic adventures, usually Lord of the Rings being a sort of myth example, and you can see how I enjoy some Lord of the Rings. So once I started really getting a handle on more of what his thought process was, I was able to enjoy it more. So we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have these story code elements, and then he has story beats as well. He has examples of famous movies or books that deal in this kind of genre, and then breaks apart how and why those work, what's the forward motion of it. When you have something as simple as action, which is, you versus you, how can you expand that to something that deserves to be the length of a full-length movie, or deserves to be the length of a novel? So one of the parts that I have appreciated the most, besides these little philosophical nuggets of like what this shows about humanity in general, and what need on that hierarchy it addresses and how, are the subplot ideas that are inherent in his description of how to complicate the plot in a meaningful way. He talks about that in horror, he talks about that in action. Sometimes when he says there's a story beat that needs to happen in a particular genre, I don't necessarily agree that is an essential ingredient to every horror story, to every action story, to every myth. But I do think that they are wonderful things to think about in terms of, again, complicating your story, adding these different types of subplots or plot threads or things that are going to go with the genre and with the message that is inherent within the genre that you can then kind of tweak or play with. So those are some of my updated thoughts on the Anatomy of Genres. I'm really enjoying it now. I was feeling pretty salty early on. I'm enjoying it a lot now. I do wish that it were organized more so in terms of like, okay, here are some of the major typical story beats. Here's a beautiful example of a movie that does exactly that. Here are the, story code elements, if he wants to use that, the weakness, need, etc. So he kind of does that, but he'll cross-cut between these different elements in a way that is not always intuitive. And so you're getting all the information, but it's like a buffet, and you get a little mashed potatoes, a roll, you get turkey. I guess it's Thanksgiving. It's a Thanksgiving buffet. And you're getting all of this really good information, but sometimes it's not a meal that always, like, you're getting a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it's easy to kind of not quite understand how a piece fits into the overall picture, which is why it took me so long to really grasp what he was trying to do. Something else that I am, for the most part, really enjoying is that he also is, he talks about in action, for example, how you have the male action story, which is the most common, but then there are slight genre differences typically for female action stories. And he doesn't, at least, you know, again, I'm this far in, but he doesn't seem to have a hierarchical look at those. Thank goodness. Otherwise, the salt would be back, the salt shaker. But I'm glad that he addresses the fact that we have, you know, female heroes, and sometimes that can kind of change the flavor of the overall genre, whether it's male-led or female-led or what have you. So I do appreciate that element of it. We'll see if that remains the case as we go, because I still have one eyebrow raised, as you can see from the glass case and all of this. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be keeping this as a resource for primarily subplot ideas and thematic ideas, which go hand in hand. If you watch my subplot video, one of the sources of plot complications that actually matter to a story that I talk about in that video is to consider your story's theme and how you can bring light to that from a different angle, maybe with different characters or what have you. And so he has some really nice practical ideas along that front for stories that might not be long enough. Maybe they're underwritten. So there you go. Those are my updated thoughts on The Anatomy of Genres by John Truby. It's definitely worth taking a look at. It's not going to fit everybody's method of learning necessarily, but as a resource to kind of browse through your own genre, it can give you some different ideas just about the underlying philosophies and the mechanics behind ways that it could work, even if you and John don't agree on every point. All right, well, thank you once again for watching. If you are interested in writing books of your own and you're not subscribed, then make sure that you do that. Like this video if you like it. There are more resources on my website for authors as well, for writers, aspiring and otherwise. Yeah, I think that's it for today. I will see you next time. All right, bye.